اعلام کردن این پنل آخر به موضوع چپ اختصاص داره. وقتی من به سه شرکت کننده نگاه کردم دیدم که خب هر سه تا مردن و به هیچ اقلیتی هم تعلق ندارن، در نتیجه هیچ نوع تبعیض مثبتی هم در کار نخواهد بود برای چیز. یعنی وقت دقیقا همون زمانی که برای هر سه تا یکسانه و شروع هر سه نفر رو من اگه اجازه بدین خیلی سریع بگم که دکتر افشین متین-اصغری متخصص خاورمیانه قرن 20 و ایران مدرن هست و اسلام سیاسی و روشنفکری اسلامی و کتاب رفرانس ایشون در سال 2001 درباره اینجوریه؟
آره اونجوریه.
در مورد اپوزیسیون دانشجویی هست در زمان شاه، Iranian student opposition to the شاه. اگر من بد معرفی کردم شما را خواهش میکنم خودتون اصلاح بکنید برای اینکه من سعی کردم خیلی خلاصه باشه. افشین جان 20 دقیقه شما فرصت دارید برای پرزنتیشن.
من الان تصویر و صدام
عالیه
خوب میاد چون من خودم درست نمیبینم. بسیار خوب. من سعی میکنم تا اون 20 دقیقه صحبتم رو تمام بکنم. تیتر صحبت من هست، ببخشید من به انگلیسی این رو نوشتم بنابراین به انگلیسی ارائهش میدم. Is the left and the question of national oppression in Iran. This presentation is based on my research on Iranian identity and national oppression. And here I summarize the findings of a book chapter I recently finished on 20th century leftist thought in Iran, summarizing and focusing its findings on the question of national oppression. Iranian leftist thought emerged alongside the national question during the constitutional revolution, which began the project of building Iran as a modern nation state. Suffering from nationalist amnesia and or methodological nationalism, most historians of modern Iran have a hard time admitting that no Iranian nation existed until early 20th century. That is about 100 years ago. Ironically, this was openly acknowledged by the first generation of nationalist thinkers like Kasravi, Taqiyzadeh, Furughi, who as late as the 1920s said that Iranian nation did not exist but had to be constructed from above by a powerful state as modern nations are established everywhere in the world. So Iran was not a unique exception. This pretty much happened everywhere. These nationalist thinkers knew that pre-national Iran under Qajar Shah was officially known as Mamalik Mahruse, referring to a plurality of countries, Mamalik, and religions, Millat-ha, that were part of a collapsing imperial structure. In other words, and as I have argued with no effect for 20 years, historically speaking, as a political entity, pre-modern Iran was an empire, not a nation. Now, the 1906 Constitution for the first time officially used the term Millat Iran in the singular, while changing the meaning of the word Millat from religious community to nation in its modern sense. The Constitution also referred to Iran as a single country, discarding the pre-modern plural sense of Iran as Mamalik Mahruse, that is several countries. According to the 1906 Constitution, however, only a small voting minority of the population belonged to the nation of Iran. In other words, the vast majority were not part of the nation. This changed when the constitutional movement became the constitutional revolution, and the constitutional regime, which was overthrown by Muhammad Ali Shah, was restored through the armed insurrection of popular militias from Azerbaijan and Gilan, backed by a Bakhtiyari tribal army. Here I'm emphasizing the fact that in 1909, 1910, Iranian constitutionalism and its project of nation building were saved through the revolutionary intervention of provinces rebelling against the reactionary regime in Tehran. The popular militias that saved constitutionalism, called Fadaiyan and Mujahideen, were the military arms of the Anjumans that the constitution had set up as provincial association to oversee elections. In both Gilan and Azerbaijan, the experienced core of these armed militias was formed by Armenians, Georgians, Azeris, and Russian Social Democrat fighters who added an important internationalist left component to the constitutional revolution. The social democratic tendency then appeared in Hezb Ejtemaiyun Amiyun, or the Democrat Party, whose program became the foundation of 20th century Iran's social reform movements. This program called, among other things, for democratizing Iranian nationhood in several ways, including making half the population, that is women, part of the nation, a proposal, of course, that was rejected by clerical opposition. During the constitutional revolution, social democrats had managed to strike a balance between internationalism and emerging Iranian, Armenian, and Azeri nationalisms, which all joined together to fight for the same revolutionary goals in Iran and the Ottoman and Russian Empire. However, for 10 years following its restoration, that is from 1911 to 1921, Iranian constitutionalism could not function due to the occupation of the country first by Russian armies joined by British and Ottoman armies during World War I. It's important to note that these 10 years dealt a devastating blow to Iranian constitutionalism, preventing it from becoming institutionalized. Here, I'm arguing that it was these 10 years of foreign intervention and occupation, and not a supposed backwardness of Iranian society, that was the major obstacle to constitutional government taking root and thus possibly allowing a more democratic path of nation building. Constitutional government and nation building resumed when foreign occupation ended in 1921. It was at this time that Iranian social democrats, now divided into a socialist and a communist party, could offer the programs of nation building. The year 1921 makes a turning point whose significance is again obscured in nationalist historiography. In 1920-1921, Iran had three provincial autonomous governments in Gilan, Azerbaijan, and Khorasan, all three being more constitutionalist and nationalist than the Tehran regime, which was propped up by the British occupation army and the reactionary Cossack brigade. Before evacuating Iran, the British arranged for a military coup by the Cossacks under the command of Reza Khan, who quickly assumed the role of the country's strongman. By the end of 1921, all three contenders to Tehran's regime had fallen, while Soviet and British armies had left the country. Iran was independent, Tehran faced no rival power centers and no foreign threat. At that point, the question was whether to resume nation building under a weak but functioning constitutional government or force an authoritarian path of nation building by a militarized executive branch. The nationalist elite chose the latter path, abandoning constitutionalism and opting for authoritarian nation building under Reza Khan as the country's virtual military dictator. Despite its progressive social agenda, the Socialist Party also backed Reza Khan, although the party's program called for a decentralized republic with a national legislative assembly formed by representatives of provincial assemblies, each enjoying some regional autonomy. Tied to changing Soviet policies, the Communist Party took changing positions on Iranian nationhood. The party's confusion showed in its contradictory policies towards the Socialist Republic it had formed jointly with Mirza Kuchek Khan. The first party program in 1920 counted 15 nations, Melliyatha, and religions, Mazahib, in the Qajar domain, declaring the party strove for a federative union of all nations, Milliyatha, living in Iran. Thus, in this original communist Europe, Iran was a multinational country, hence requiring a federal government. But references to the question of nationalities were mere abstraction, that these nationalities in question or the criteria for nationhood were not identified, nor was it explained how a federal Iran might come about. The program assumed Iran was on the verge of joining a worldwide communist revolution, which would then automatically solve all such problems. This perspective quickly changed as the Soviet Union began backing Reza Khan, calling him the representative of Iran's national bourgeoisie, even though he was consolidating his dictatorship and repressing the left. The Communist Party then reversed its initial claim about Iran being a multinational country, advocating instead for a unitary nation state, albeit one that was built within a constitutional framework and allowing some degree of provincial autonomy. In November 1925, official Soviet organ Izvestia welcomed the replacement of the Qajar dynasty by what was clearly Reza Khan's dictatorship in the guise of a new monarchy. Less than 2 years later, the Communist Party again reversed its positive estimations when its second Congress in 1927 called Reza Shah a tool of British imperialism who pretended to be a friend of the Soviet Union. The resolutions of this Congress once again changed the party's position on the question of nationalities in Iran. The party now called for the establishment of a parliamentary republic founded on the free association of the nations within Iran. This would be a federal republic in which the Communist Party would fight for the complete freedom and internal autonomy of the nations within Iran, even up to their secession from the center, if the majority of the toiling people so desired. As Reza Shah's dictatorship consolidated in the 1930s, neither leftists nor any other political parties were allowed to function or present their views on nation building, and the most articulate expression of Marxist thought, briefly appearing in the journal Dunya, remained silent on politics, though it clearly favored a more democratic form of Iranian nationalism, shown in Tariq Arani's upholding of constitutionalism during his famous trial. The Iranian left found its classic expression in the Tudeh party, which originally was formed as an anti-fascist, constitutionalist, and nationalist united front with a communist core. The party's original program, updated in 1943, defined its goal as upholding the country's independence and territorial integrity and a democratic regime. In 1943, the program added the right of national self-determination, but only for a unitary Iranian nation. The program advocated for linguistic freedom, azadi zaban, for non-Persian speakers without considering them nations, or Iran a multinational country. The left's major test of national question came when Soviet occupation forces propped up autonomous governments in Azerbaijan and Kurdistan, forcing the Tudeh party to support these regimes despite its initial opposition. Both regimes enjoyed significant local support. Initially, they had the sympathy of Tehran's progressive forces as they denied separatist aspirations. The Azerbaijan regime declaring its objective was to lead in the liberation of the country from a ruling reactionary elite, as Azerbaijan had done during the constitutional revolution. The bloody crushing of these regimes after Stalin abandoned them to make an oil deal with Premier Ghabam was a setback to the Iranian left, causing the first major split in the Tudeh party and the emergence of a social democratic and nationalist left led by Khalil Maliki's Third Force. After the 1953 coup, the existence of national oppression in Iran, of course, could not be openly discussed, but it was occasionally acknowledged by former communists, such as Jalal al-Ahmad, who on the services of betrayal of intellectuals had written, and I quote, "From the birth of the nation concept in the constitutional era to the present, Tehran governments have considered Azerbaijan a colony, if not politically and economically, but certainly in a cultural sense. The first detrimental result of this culture of colonialism is the killing of Turkish culture in Azerbaijan. During the 1960s and 70s, national oppression and the question of whether Iran might be a multinational country was occasionally debated in leftist circles in and around the student opposition movement abroad that would more freely discuss such issues. The two guerrilla organizations of this period, Fadayan and Mujahideen, were committed to a unitary Iran, as indicated in the names of both organizations, which referred to the people of Iran, Khalq Iran, in singular. National oppression was marginally addressed in Fadayan literature and never took a clear or systematic stand on how it might be resolved. The Tudeh Party's 1975 program defined it as the only party of a single Iranian working class. It upheld Iran's territorial integrity and called for ending national oppression through the formation of a national democratic republic. Basically, the program argued national oppression had to be overcome through the voluntary unity of Iran's peoples in the plural, each of whom could freely determine its destiny through a national assembly in its own national unit. But the program did not call for a federal government, which was the obvious arrangement for joining autonomous regions together. So as we saw above, and I'm trying to conclude and wrap up, leftist consensus on national oppression in Iran involved an ambiguity, going back to the Communist Party's vacillating positions in the 1920s. Leftist thinkers and organizations generally recognized the abstract right of self-determination for Iran's plurality of peoples, Khalq, while agreeing that Iran was a unitary nation rather than a multinational country. But the question of national oppression exploded during the revolution when the monarchist state collapsed and allowed the people of Iran at the grassroots to take matters in their own hands. The most radical expression of this was shown in Kurdistan, where unpopular militias defended the region's local autonomy. The Kurdish War of Resistance was led by the Democratic Party of Kurdistan and Komala, a leftist organization whose aim was summed up in the slogan, "Autonomy for Kurdistan, Democracy for Iran." This was not a call for Kurdish national self-determination, something that no leftist organization, including the Kurdish ones, espoused. As the Kurdish war continued, the non-Kurdish left divided to support it or side with the Islamic Republic in suppressing it. The Tudeh Party sided with the regime, but some left organizations, such as the minority faction of the Fadayan, even joined Kurdish militias. The left coalition, called the Democratic National Front, supported Kurdish demands and called for a federal republic in which national minorities, Aqalliyat-hay Milli, would enjoy regional autonomy, having their own local assembly and bilingual education, but within the large frame of a federal constitution. Leftist intellectuals generally acknowledged national oppression at this time. They called it the legacy of the Pahlavi era, but did not agree on how to address it. A fairly nuanced view on this, for example, was expressed by writer-poet Muhammad Ali Sepanlu, who said in a 1979 interview, and referring to the war in Kurdistan, that the Kurds were a nation, Millat, and hence, in principle, entitled to the right of national self-determination, including secession from Iran. But Sepanlu insisted that the full implementation of this right, the right to national self-determination, would tear Iran apart without serving Kurdish interests. Instead, he proposed that Kurds, Azerbaijanis, Turkmens, and Khuzestani Arabs should enjoy regional autonomy, particularly in cultural affairs within a democratic Iran. I think my time may be up. Is that correct?
3 minutes.
Well, I think I stop here, and because I said mostly what I wanted to say, and I can take questions or continue the discussion afterwards.
ولی 3 دقیقه وقت دارین هنوز اگه میخواین کماکان یه نتیجه گیری بکنین.
ببینید حالا نتیجه گیری رو به فارسی میتونم بکنم. خب البته این بحث بعد از سال اول انقلاب هم ادامه پیدا کرد. الان تقریبا 50 سال گذشته و به نظر من میرسه نتیجه گیری کلی که میتونم بکنم از نظریات چپ روی مسئله ملی اینه که خب چپی‌ها به وجود ستم ملی در ایران اذعان داشتن و این مهمه به خاطر اینکه جریانات دیگه اصولاً یا به کل اصلا نافی این مسئله هستن یا اینکه باش جدی برخورد نمی‌کنن. منتها می‌بینیم که در مثلا دیروز من جلسات امروز رو نتونستم شرکت کنم چون شب بود و ما خواب بودیم، ولی جلسات دیروزی که بودم خب صحبت‌ها حول جنبش زن زندگی آزادی و وقایع اخیر که هست می‌بینیم که مسئله ستم ملی یه جوری مطرح شده و حتی مثلا سلطنت طلب‌ها هم در اون کولیشنی که آقا رضا پهلوی درست کرد آمدن و یک کامپوننت کردی در اون انجام دادن، یا اینکه جمهوری اسلامی با روی کار آوردن آقای پزشکیان به یه شکلی به این مسئله حداقل غیر مستقیم داره اذعان میکنه. کلیت صحبت هم اینه که نظریات چپ شاید در سالهای بعد از انقلاب این مهمه که ستم ملی رو در ایران اذعان میکنه، به عنوان یه مسئله بهش میپردازه. منتها یه نوع ابهامی که بهش اشاره کردم وجود داره تو نظرات چپ که آیا ایران چند ملیتیه یا اینکه نه ملیت ایرانی به هر حال یک واقعیت ابژکتیو داره، حالا به هر شکلی که ساخته شده و ستمگران هم هست و چجوری باید با این مسئله برخورد کرد. اینه که به نظر من میرسه این صورت مسئله مطرح شده بازه و یک جواب روشن و وافی و کافی هم نمیتونم بهش بگم چپ دادن، ولی میتونم بگم که نظرات چپ بیشتر از بقیه دیدگاه سیاسی ایران حداقل با این مسئله درگیر بوده. من اینو بیشتر از دیدگاه چپ‌های ایرانی کلی مطرح کردم و خوبه که تو بحثایی که میکنیم جوابهایی که به این مسئله داده شده از طرف خود کامیونیتی های مثل کامیونیتی کرد، آذری، بلوچ، عرب خوزستانی، ترکمن ها، اونا چه جوابایی دادن به این مسئله، خب اونم مطرحه که باید بهش بپردازیم. من تموم میکنم صحبتم.
خیلی ممنون.